saying, it is so wonderful to have you here today. Coltrane is a mentor of mine and has done some unbelievable work in his professional career and for the people that he considers friends and mentees and people that he coaches. And it's amazing to have him here talking about community. Those of you who just saw his talk know the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about. And Coltrane, I will pass it on to you for a presentation on building community through diversity, equity, inclusion. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions and get some engagement from the folks in the room.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Christopher. And I'm always excited to share a stage with you. You know, you're one of my favorite people. And just to have so many people that are part of my community, friends, I call you family, that are joining in for us to have this time together. I really appreciate you. And I hope that I have something relevant to share. So we'll get right into it. So building community through diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? This is like a topic that is really dear to me because I can't say when I actually started believing in community or believing in DEI. I just inherited these things through the story of my life. And hopefully you got a connection to that and where that started in my journey early on as a teen. So some of the things I'm hoping that we'll learn today, right? That we'll gain this appreciation for the challenges that we face collectively around community, gaining an understanding of the unique roles of creating the opportunity for others to thrive within community, right? Not just about us personally, but about us, the community, identifying our own personal behaviors that limit us in connecting to community, creating the purpose and understanding the resources available to us, right? As we create goals around what community means for us, and then also developing this part of strength that's important to us. So I'll just say this quickly before we get into the work, which is that Christopher is going to be my partner in how we kind of move through this and into the Q&A. So I'm going to leave room for you at the end to ask whatever questions you'd like, but please feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat as Christopher will be monitoring them. Let's give each other opportunity to share and let's stay connected. I'll do my best to keep the energy high. So there's all these different types of communities, right, that I alluded to in my talk. And the first and most available to us are these communities of circumstance, right, that hover around how we get here, right? And so these communities were people who we share the same plights or histories or experiences, right? And in this hover things like our race and ethnicity, our gender capacity, how we begin in terms of what we're taught, told, and what we connect to. But then beyond that, our place that can feel like community, but we migrate throughout life, right? Whether it's going away to school, our 20s exploring life, and we inherit new places, usually not out of circumstance, but sometimes out of choice, right? Of people we want to be around, places that seem interest and the like. Communities of interest and practice sort of are in the middle of this community paradigm, and they tend to be more centered around our choices, right? People who we share interests with, practices as well, and then communities of actions, which we anchored at the end of my talk as most important that we want to really make sure we're moving toward. We talk about circumstances being things like BIPOC community, our new employees that are a part of a company. Refugees, for instance, can be a part of a community of circumstances. And we don't want to think about people in circumstances as having a stagnant identity. People in circumstances don't often want to belong to those circumstances only. And so we have to be careful how we also put people in molds and boxes that are defining them by how we connect to their suffering. Places that we talked about as well, office coworkers, tourists, nationalists, all center an identity around where we are in the moment, right? Has references obviously to what the place means to us and the value that place gives. We go to places to make money. We go to places to shop and exchange values. But some people are in places and don't feel as if they know exactly what the place offers them and how the place creates for them an addition to or confirmation of their identity. Communities of practice, editors, lawyers, accountants, trainers. A lot of vocation hovers around practice, but there are also practices that are non-traditional and aren't always about employment, such as practicing a martial art or mindfulness, and what it is like to be a part of a community of people that are doing things that are not in the mainstream, that does not necessarily have status connected to it, and that doesn't always hover with politics. Interests, book clubs, social media connections, and support groups. And communities of interest often have these very overt interests that we understand and know about, but sometimes there are subversive interests that lie sort of within subparts of the group and the community that we're not aware of when we join a community of interest. We have to be careful for those types of communities and what it is to think we're joining a community for one reason or one interest, and see that there are polar or a spectrum of ideas of what people think we're all interested in. Communities of action, we talked about environmentalists, ERGs, political activists, volunteers, all focused on beyond what we're interested in or what excites us, the idea that I must commit to the value of building something greater than my circumstances, the place that defines me, the practice that I am engaged in, and the interests that I enjoy. Action is really about circling back to the first community of circumstance, where suffering in some way binds us, to action, where suffering, the idea of understanding suffering, is about what frees us and finding ways to overcome suffering, in other words. And so action brings us full circle in the community paradigm. Our assumptions around community are that community design is flexible, right? That no one community, whether it's of circumstances or of action, chooses to or can by nature remain the same. Communities are constantly redesigned and reevaluated and reassessed based on new members, the idea of what we believe in, and the pressures of the outside world that are constantly helping us define who we are and how we got here in this moment. Communities have a value proposition. In other words, we belong not because we just exist, but because we have purpose. And we're doing something impactful, that our purpose is not just for status and recognition, but our purpose is to do something that we consider to be relevant. We talked about community in the context of organizations. It's very important because all of us will go home to or back to work tomorrow an organization. And what we're really talking about is the complexity of community within organizational structure. Organizations by themselves, and all of this is subject to the culture and the outside world that our organization is dropped within. But in general, organizational leadership is formal, right? As opposed to community organization and leadership is informal. And that is to say, in communities, no one's necessarily, for instance, drawing a salary off of being a part of a book club. The leadership structure is sometimes informal in the sense that people can replace who's leading the community at different times. I'm going on vacation. We need someone else to lead the fitness club, right? Someone has something to offer based on something we're doing now. They become the subject matter expert. Purpose and mission is centralized in organizations. Has to be published sometimes because we have shareholders and we have stakeholders, but often centralized because along with formal leadership, comes the expectation to have formal purpose. Communities often have individualized purpose, and that is to say that we define ourselves based on how we see and understand the value of community. Even in communities of circumstance, someone can say, there are parts of my identity of circumstance that I interpret differently than you do. In other words, I see suffering in a different way, and I emotionalize and internalize suffering in a different way than you. Why? Because there's no mandate for me to see things exactly the way you do. Resources are often fixed in an organization, and that's to say, not that they don't fluctuate from year to year, quarter to quarter, but there's an expectation that time, money, and politics have some fixed value that allow me to operate under certain assumptions. Whereas communities can often be fluid, where resources can be voluntary. We might not have a budget, and there may not be accountability for what resource means at any given time. Progress in organizations is objective in the sense that we measure it often through metrics. We want to have measurable, scalable, and sustainable progress in an organization in order to meet the expectations of shareholders, stakeholders, and the people that we serve. Community progress can be subjective, even if we are fighting for something passionate in a community of action, like saving the environment. Some can say that success looks like our ability to stop bulldozers from tearing down ancient trees. Others might say that just the fact that we were able to launch a social media campaign to get the attention around the event was success. So success often means different things to different people within a community. It doesn't mean we can't measure success together. It just means it's more difficult in a community setting to understand the value of having shared progress. Let's be intentional. Without being intentional, communities become biased, exclusionary, and stagnant in progress towards helping to support the larger organization. Without attention, communities could silo our organization. We can, in other words, have communities that use the power of intention to do things, but when they feel disgruntled or isolated, use that same power to protest involvement in moving the organization forward. And some of that can be intentional or non-intentional. Without purpose, communities tend to fragment over time. Even in communities that have a deep shared identity, a shared history, a religious connection, or a community or an ethnic tradition, those traditions or practices can erode over time if we don't maintain some idea or some conversation, rather, to revisit who we are and where we want to go. And those values can often push us to rethink those values over time and often get into a paradigm shift based on sort of the polar ideas of tradition versus progress. The challenges to building community, right? Imposter syndrome. This idea that insecurities that we have make us feel like we don't have a right to the deepest levels of a community. It's someone saying that we're not strong enough to run a race and be a part of a relay. Someone saying that I'm not Black enough because I didn't come to a certain understanding or born a certain way into being Black. Someone saying that I'm too new to actually contribute at the deepest levels and deepest conversations of an employment team, a team set up at your job. misunderstanding that belonging is more directly related to performance versus acceptance. In other words, that I have to do something in order to belong. The idea of even going extreme into some communities, hazing people and requiring people to do things just to belong. This idea that imposter syndrome prevents us with this ability to speak up, to act, and engage in the community. So there are questions we have to ask ourselves, right? What are the barriers to belonging? Are those barriers purely psychological, right? Are we using our own fears of who we are to drive whether we feel connected or not? Or are those fears created by real challenges based on bias within the community, stratification, or a sustained negative stigma towards me or what I represent? Resource scarcity is another challenge of the community. Communities, as we talked about before, have this fluidity to them and this informality that can create challenges to creating political capital, right? Organizing ourselves in terms of what we believe and the idea of what it is to utilize influence. Monetary resources, figuring out the challenge of what do we need to invest in making sure that we don't just exist, but that we exist with purpose. And time. How do we have enough time to properly plan and execute and evaluate the things that we want to do by design? And alignment. The challenges of moving all these people with very different ideas into a common value system, vision, and purpose. And how do we take that value proposition and account for the fact that we should be moving from who's right to and who's wrong towards what's right and what's wrong for our community? And are there any dispersed and competing perspectives within the community? Not that we should vote on all the time or have consensus even, but that we should at least acknowledge. Communities are filled with perspectives that we as individuals have to learn that we may not understand, but we should somehow respect. And now, how we turn these challenges into opportunity. This Greek term chiasmus, which is to flip. How do we flip those same things into opportunities? Finding our uniqueness. So imposter syndrome, how can we understand the real root of what that is, the complexity of that trope, and flip it into being our uniqueness? And how do we then, in that uniqueness, the thing that makes us special to the community, bring our lived as well as our learned experiences? And knowing that the search for confidence in our lived and learned experiences are about introspection, self-evaluating our personal strength, our skills, abilities, gifts, talents, and attributes, but also our inspiration, being able to offer to people the ability to model a part of what makes us special, and doing the same in turn, modeling someone else's special attributes. Defining our resources, right? Making sure we're mobilizing community resources correctly, and making sure that we are understanding where there are opportunities to be sponsored and to have investors in the things we want to pull forward. The most powerful basic community within the concept of economic development, for instance, is the cooperative, and what it is like to have a cooperative of people who agree that we need each other in order to reach a common value. And how do we mobilize our resources in a cooperative in order to get things done? In a daycare cooperative of 9, that 8 individuals are looking for their to actually benefit from the cooperative by sending their children to the last member of the cooperative, and therefore being able to pool their resources in order to have a member of their community watch their children, for instance? And how do we articulate the value proposition for something like that? How do we do it in a way that it's not threatening to the parents who are looking for care, for instance, and the caregiver of the community's children? And then lastly, the idea of accomplishing alignment, right? How are we empowering people on one hand and having accountability on the other? That we're not sacrificing empowerment for people's perspectives, empowerment for people's identities. And how do people buy into the value proposition that I don't have to lose my individualism, my perspective, and my identity in order to have accountability, to have structure, and to have some level of connection to higher vision, mission, and value shared by the community? I'll stop there and open it up for any questions.
So there's a great question here from actually earlier in the conversation. It says, I have some coworkers that think ERGs are a waste of time and that they silo people into groups that they're comfortable with. Yeah. How do you see ERGs as building bridges to bring people together?
That's a great question. And ERGs, I think, fundamentally have to be a part of a larger diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. If they don't ladder up to the main vision for DEI for the company, then you're right, they're really merely clubs. So in other words, they have to be a part of how we move our products and services forward in a way that creates equity for the people we serve and are built with the perspectives of the diverse employees. ERGs helping to be a part of creating a culture of inclusion at the company through things like the ERG's ability to create professional development and growth opportunities for people in marginalized groups, and the ability to create this opportunity to hire into the company and cultivate the leadership as well as the careers of different diverse talent. That means first that ERGs have to be created around the listening tools that are available to us. What focus groups are we convening? How are ERGs paying attention to what's being said in the different channels available to the company? And then what's the accountability that ERGs have towards getting things done annually? How are we representing the overall vision of the company, but also how are we creating opportunities to share across ERGs, be collaborative in our approach, but then also creating an opportunity to help support, more importantly, the overall DEI strategy for the company.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Coltrane. How are you both?
Good to see you, my friend.
It's good to see you again, and I'm always happy to hear your wonderful talks. I'm happy you can join Chris on here too.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I'll jump right into it. So a little bit of background. I currently work in professional advisory services, working with Fortune 500 companies where those relationships that you're really building are outside of their community. And that kind of unique community where you're building with your client, it's usually, teetering on that fine line of, being strictly professional and also still trying to be, a change maker and a good influence on the culture that you bring to that relationship and trying to be a light there. So I guess my question to you, Coltrane, is whenever you're on the outside of an organization looking in that professional environment, how do you really walk that line?
Yeah, so Matt, it's a great question. When you're like in advisory services, for instance, and you've got clients, not just customers, not just transactional, but you get to see sort of the organizational challenges of a group, sort of connected to them, but not a part of them. Obviously, you want to maintain the professional integrity of why you have the relationship, but relationships morph based on your proximity to what, not just the problems you're trying to solve professionally, but the human beings that you're actually interacting with. And so it may surface, Matt, that professionally, a person shares with you or you observe the fact that there's marginalization in their experience, this inability based on either stagnation, politics, or internal stratification their inability to be effective in their role? In other words, did you see a power that's not being utilized by their organization or by a larger community of organizations that they are trying to plant themselves within? And this is where we've got to be able to have the flexibility of being human with people that are in need, and what it is to really inspire people, add value, and create pockets of hope for people in moments that really can benefit them. So really, Matt, the real true opportunity is when we ally. In other words, finding ways to leverage your own privilege in a moment where you're on the outside, right? What it is to lead a person from the sidelines and to play one of those very important roles of either being a coach for a moment, being a cheerleader on something you've observed that they're doing that's stellar, being a counselor over a specific question they need advice for, or being a connector over an opportunity that you see in the background around the corner because of your role that you want to point out to them that might be able to not just add hope, but some tangible value to their career.
Thank you very much, Coltrane. And as always, wonderfully said.
Always good to see you, Matt.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
All right.
Thank you again.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. As Steve said in the chat, it's nice to see you, old man Matt Graham. He looks much. We've all grown up a good bit here. So I want to jump here. There's a few other people on the hold line. I want to bring them in a minute here, but there's somebody. There's a great question here. So how do you? It's from Jesse Santana. So how do you have conversations with leaders that are still in the performative stage?
Yeah.
But their employees are asking for more, and what I can assume is the performative stage of DE&I is great. We need more leaders. We need more programs. But there's a real need to make change on the structural level and to really provide opportunities. What could you say about that?
So, Jesse, a great question. I said the first thing we've got to do is plug into the conversation. The worst thing we want to do is have challenges that we don't feel are being heard. That doesn't help us feel any better about being change agents. So plug in. And by plug in, I mean, where are the opportunities for you to be heard, but to be effective in what it is that you're saying or what you want to contribute? Joining an ERG is plugging in. Being able to have conversations with your chief diversity officer is plugging in. Being able to have office hours with good leaders who cultivate conversations and are influential to the culture of the organization is plugging in. But what does the conversation look like? Because let's be honest, sometimes we join a conversation and we're plugged in when we're frustrated, when we're tired of things being the way that they are. I'm not here to tell you that that's easy. But in that challenge of plugging in, you want to go in it when you're not alone. Create opportunities to observe other people's conversations about the problems. Understand the value of what it is to use community as a backdrop to present challenges, but also to present opportunities. It doesn't make your personal issue any less valuable to create shared momentum with other people in your company or your organization. It does mean that may be a time value that's a little slower in order to gain the type of traction that you want, but it could be more effective and more powerful to use the collective voice. The other thing I would say is understand your organization's politics. In other words, we don't want to burn bridges, we want to build them. That doesn't mean that we should silence ourselves, but we do have to look at where are there opportunities that are either set as strategies for the company to plug in, or where there are opportunities because you see a dire need for change and a readiness within a team to actually build the bridge. That can be a town hall that's specifically focused on your area you want to improve and your ability to say, here's my moment, whether it be through chat or an invitation within the town hall from the leader to have a deeper and more valuable conversation later.
That's wonderful. I know Jessie does a lot of work with DE&I. I went to one of her sessions a little while ago. She had a LinkedIn session, so I'm happy we got a chance to answer a question. There's a chat here that I think would be a really great question. It's from Gina.
Okay.
And I think this could also apply to more than just the initiative that they're talking about here. So they wrote, I work in healthcare. We're focused on social determinants of health.
Yes.
And looking for our community to discuss, offer solutions, and ask for donations related to transportation. So patients have no way to get to their medical appointments, which leads to the person becoming very sick and then needing an ambulance. Just an example. How do we bring people together who may have never had this issue in their own lives? And I think this also lends itself well to the conversation of asking for buy-in for DE&I initiatives with folks that don't have that lived experience, trying to help them understand why we need something from our standpoint as a community leader.
Absolutely, Christopher. I think it's a wonderful question. Part of what we're really talking about is how do we humanize service and humanize our products? And how do we look at the whole needs of a person and not just these sort of ad hoc approaches to only what our interest is in a person's life. And healthcare is the most sensitive area that we have to think about the placement of products and services, and how one product without sensitivity to a person's humanity that we may think is helping them actually could be causing a barrier to health. And so we've got to think about a whole person in the context of community health and what it is to really immerse a person in a continuum of service. And what part do we play in that continuum as a healthcare provider, as a physician, as a product or service provider, as a community leader, in education, whatever it might be surrounding this person, this human. And how then do we be a part of the consortium approach to placing our products and services within a continuum of service? This is difficult to do because a lot of organizations are in the business of making money, and therefore effectiveness and efficiency around their own product and service is really the preoccupation. But there are connecting groups, there are connecting fibers in communities, NGOs, nonprofits, community activists, leaders who can see the big picture, but also can share in the infrastructure of how to bring people together in consortiums of care to first listen to the human experiences of who we serve, but then also create result-oriented opportunities. All of it is really about the social contract, though. And what is it that we're promising to the people that are in the communities that we want to serve? And then how do we create an open door that the accountability is about often and frequently checking in to see how humane we're really being?
Somebody in the chat here Ashley wrote, how do we humanize service, and said that they're going to remember that forever.
Yes. Humanizing service, absolutely. And bringing dignity to those being served, right? We have a history in the Western Hemisphere of guns, rum, and horses. The idea of conquering people, that people connected to territory. But we've migrated that into the way we serve people in businesses and organizations, that we give people the thing that baits them into what we want, as opposed to the human process of asking the simple question, what is it that you deserve? And in asking that question, companies and company leaders and organization leaders cannot be afraid of the response. What people deserve may mean that we have to create opportunity for them to have a piece of our privilege.
As always, Coltrane, everything you say makes me think.
And that's not easy. That's not easy to do, Christopher. If we're talking about healthcare and we're talking about sensitivities towards clinical trials, for instance, and what it is for a person's social and community dynamic over time to shift their health paradigm, and the risk factors associated with what it is to be quote unquote healthy, that can create a barrier even in how we understand how people communicate risk, right? Not just the urgency of how they communicate their issues, but their own vocabulary and lexicon of communicating urgency and crises is different. And so we even have to understand at a very basic level, especially where people are marginalized and have been away from certain privilege, what the actual lexicon is of saying, this is what I deserve, because it can come across threatening, not because it is a threat, but because we just don't understand. And so in that, there has to often be mediators, moderators, facilitators of even just the lexicon of urgency and what it is to connect with people who just traditionally have been told, my needs come last.
Wow. You know, culture. So for anybody who still wants to ask a question, there is still time. So you're more than welcome to ask one. But while we're waiting for another question, Coltrane, I think I have one for you, because we were talking so much today about cultivators. It's people making positive organizational change. I know you're very familiar with that. I know you're familiar that I, in the past, was a cultivator. And it's been a very nice day to be able to think about challenges and to connect with other people that are driving that positive change, because it can be challenging.
Yeah.
In big organizations, it can be very challenging to make change. And so what I'd love to ask you, for folks that are earlier on or are facing challenges, maybe uphill adversity when it comes to senior leadership, whatever it might be, what advice could you give somebody that is earlier on or wants to make a change and is having challenges?
Yeah. So part of it we touched on, which is understand your organizational politics. Not because you need to acculturate or assimilate to them, but because you need that in order to navigate impactful conversations, right? Don't assume who has a title is in charge, because communities aren't really about the hierarchies of organizations alone. Communities are about belonging. And so new to the organization, you have an agency that has to not assume who's in charge all the time. Communities are impactful because they create social contracts. Big and small, you have the ability on teams, in one-on-ones, to create a social contract. Whether that social contract is created in 30 seconds, 5 minutes, or within your first year. That social contract is a value statement of why we need each other. And it doesn't have to be a romanticized conversation. It could be a very practical but yet intimate way of communicating what we think our values are, getting those on the table and agreeing to them. So remember, your orientation to the company is based on the fact that you create the social contract. The social contract has values at the center of it. And because of that, there's an ultimate opportunity towards equity, because a social contract is signed equally by all. And it is regardless of title and position and tenure. It's really about how you position yourself and how you position the thing that you are proposing as urgent. Urgency trumps tenure any day. Yeah. If the house is burning, it doesn't matter who's been in the house longer than someone else. We have a contract socially in that moment to get ourselves out. And it's about who has agency, boldness, and who we trust, who we follow out of the burning building.
I love that. I love that.
And thanks everyone for joining. It's special to be in these types of conversations. So thank you, everyone. I can't see you by face or by name, but thank you.
There's a bunch of great folks chatting in the... Yeah, Steve wrote in the chat, can we start a Kickstarter to nudge you to write a book? Or what do we have to do to make that happen? So.
Steve, and Steve, thank you so much. We're going to write it. I'll write it with your help, my friend. I appreciate it. Thank you for always supporting me.
So in the Q&A here, and it looks like that the person that asked to join didn't join. Maybe there's an issue in the back end. Who knows? And I apologize to anyone that's trying and can't get it. And it makes it seem like I'm saying, oh, they didn't show up. So apologies if that's what you're trying to do and that's what's happening. So we have a question in the chat here from Jesse again. So what keeps you motivated to continue building these impactful communities of change?
The Christophers of the world, the fact that change happens through relationships, and that the true measure of change is the value of your social contract with at least one other person. In other words, that the thing we build together is our capacity to love each other, trust each other, and make each other better. And that's the beginning of community. In my belief, there's a story of a man named Cain who slew his brother. And in my belief, God asked Cain, "Where's your brother?" And he replied, "Am I my brother's keeper?" To which God looked and frowned to say, "Yes, he is." So I'd like to think and offer that I wake up every day and go to bed thinking, am I my brother's keeper? Have I been my brother's keeper today? Who did I reach out to last week that may have been suffering? And before I lay my head down and watch my favorite movie, should I place a call or a text message to say, how are you and how are things going? And how do I do that regardless of natural affinity, origin, when I met them, what languages they speak, and what they may be going through? And how do I open my spirit to the concept that connection is what pushes us all to grow and give, and that without growing, we can't give at our optimal level? And how that will bring me to emotional throes and a level of vulnerability that sometimes is gut-wrenching, that I'll cry tears I've never cried before, full of joy, sorrow, and pain as I connect with a person's story, but that this part of individual development and growth is essential to organizational development and growth, and one can't happen without the other. And so shared suffering is the optimal concept of how we move mountains. And that we can't speak to a mountain and it move if we're not walking together towards understanding our capacity to actually speak things into existence and do the impossible. My story will never be and can't be filled with what I've done alone. And we've got to invite people into the social contract of what opportunity really looks like.
And I can say some of the best wisdom I've ever got from you in regards to community building is building those individual relationships and connecting with people on a deep and personal level and taking responsibility in some ways for their growth, for their well-being, for their happiness in that community. And I think if you can do that at its absolute base, even if the community isn't well organized yet or doesn't have a lot of resources or doesn't have the right pieces and parts together to be a perfect textbook community, that relationship will bring people together.
Yes.
At its core. And so, and Coltrane, you know, there's so many things in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. So many people saying that they filled a notebook with your stuff and that they're really thanking you for your honesty and your heartfelt wisdom and that you bring joy. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. We've reached time. And I know folks are going to join the networking session. We're going to have that, but I just want to say thank you so much for giving us your time, Coltrane. I know there's a lot of folks in the chat that are cultivators that are building initiatives at their company that are going to be able to leave this and to make the lives of other folks better. And so it matters so much to me that you were here as my mentor.
Thanks, Christopher.
Thanks, Steve.
Pleasure. Thanks, Steve, for starting this. Thanks, Lisa, for organizing it. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you. Thanks, Tara, for coaching me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. And we will see you all in the main stage. You have a great day, Coltrane.
Take care. You too.